Welcome to Energy Thinks, a podcast about leading into the energy future. I'm Tisha Schuler, your host and the CEO of Adamantine Energy. My book, The Myth and the Moment, From Polarization to Progress and the New Energy Landscape, is out. I hope you will find it on Amazon. And if you already read it and you loved it, I hope you will give it a 5-star review. On today's show, I have a really special guest. I speak with Josh Freed. He's Senior Vice President of Climate and Energy at Third Way. I wanted to speak to Josh because I've known him now for a decade. We do not see the world the same way. We end up in these kind of center lefty places, and we've often bumped heads. And so at times of great import and change, I always want to talk to someone who looks at the world different than me. I think that Josh is important because Third Way is one of those groups trying to figure out the future of the Democratic Party, their messaging, the left. And that's going to be a really important component to what emerges next after the Trump administration. And so I will just remind you as you listen that for many of my audience, you won't agree with Josh either. And some of the things he says, you'll kind of go, Tisha should push back. But part of this is not to try to, well, there's no part where I'm trying to change Josh's mind. There's just a part where I'm trying to learn. What does the world look like if you're sitting in a think tank, in a do tank on the left? What does it look like? And what do we need to know to be good partners, to be more effective communicators, to help curate a world where oil and gas isn't polarized? So you can learn more about Josh in our show notes. You can stay connected to the work that I'm doing by going to our website, energythinks.com. And while you're there, I hope you will subscribe to my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true. After the podcast, I'll give you a quick personal update. But for now, I hope that you will enjoy my conversation with Josh Freed. Josh Freed, welcome to the Energy Thinks podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I have been friends a long time. We don't always see the world the same way, which is, of course, why I want to talk to you on the podcast today. Last year, I published my book, The Myth and the Moment, and I write about how the myth of an easy energy transition is colliding with reality. Yeah. Now, your work looks at this really from a different angle, and I think of you as focusing on political viability. But for our audience who doesn't know you or your work at Third Way, can you talk a little bit about your work in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. So Third Way is a national multi-issue think tank, and we view ourselves as part of the center left and really tackle issues across a wide variety of topics on how do we solve the big, bold, hairy challenges the United States face in a way that is pragmatic and actually gets things done. And so, particularly for climate and energy, how that has applied is what's politically realistic and what do the American people want? And many years ago now, and this will be very familiar to you and I'm sure your listeners, the obvious realization was clean energy needs to be cheap. It needs to outcompete fossil fuels on price and on convenience and reliability if it is going to displace them. And that's been our motivation as we've analyzed what policy pathways have been discussed at the national level and to some extent at the local and state level, what technologies can be used and how to get things done. It's oftentimes had Democrats as uncomfortable as Republicans because it requires compromise, it requires trade-offs, but it's also really had us orient ourselves in a way that differs from a lot of the green groups that are engaged in this conversation. And, to your point about us often disagreeing with the oil and gas industry and others who come at it from a different perspective as well.
Well, there's a lot that I really enjoy about your work, and you alluded to some of it, which is not just succumbing to the orthodoxies. Like, this is the way we, the left, or we, the Democrats, or even we, the centrists, think about things. I find that you in particular, in Third Way in general, will often question some of those assumptions. So one of the big assumptions out there right now is that we're having a crisis of affordability, and all things energy and climate now need to be squeezed through the keyhole of affordability.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, and I don't have a preconceived answer to this. I just think it's perhaps become overly simplified. And I'm wondering what you think. Like, when you think about the US energy system right now, what do you think? What problem are we actually solving for, generally, and maybe with voters, from your lens? And what are the bigger systemic issues that, for those of us that actually want to make the world better, what should we be thinking about that's not just the affordability of today?
Yeah, look, there is a broad affordability crisis in the United States that goes well beyond energy. And that's important and needs to be acknowledged. I think the challenges of costs, the inability of the government to either slow or bring down costs or ensure that people have jobs that are providing them the income with steady increases to pay for their lives and save a little, has just utterly corroded the ability of government to get things done. It's why Joe Biden lost in large part in his effort to get the nomination. It really was a drag on Kamala Harris. And it's why Donald Trump is quite unpopular now in part. It is a big part of the challenge that we face in the electricity sector right now, driven by a really endemic failure to build the kind of infrastructure we need. But it's not just clean infrastructure. Part of it is we're not building transmission lines as fast as we need to by any means. We're not scaling all sorts of clean, including renewables, but also battery storage and nuclear. But you can't build a natural gas pipeline in New England to save, or New York State, to save ratepayers' wallets. And Governor Catherine Hochul has come out in favor of building a new gas pipeline because she said New York is literally not going to have enough access to fuel to power the city without it, and has come under widespread attack from the left. So we do need to tackle that issue. But there's a broader systemic problem that you refer to, which is we don't build infrastructure or do big things in the United States anymore. And it is because there's this ideological challenge on both sides of the aisle of we need to only adhere to a set of technologies, a set of market constraints, or other politically imposed circumstances that really do limit the way our economy builds things and powers the country. And so it's no surprise we're desperately falling behind China on any number of both technologies, but also our ability to even power the economy in an affordable way or in a way that's reliable. And boy, that is already coming back to bite us. And that keeps me up at night as much as the affordability crisis.
Yeah, I want to pull on a couple of threads that you identified there, because this is really interesting, right? We talk about affordability, and very quickly we get to the need to build things. But you alluded to something really important, which is just the ability to do big things, which means we have to get out of our hyper polarized teams, right? There has to be some sense of unity. I'm obsessed with this idea of what it would take to build a vibrant center that doesn't agree on things, but is motivated by things like building big things, international competitiveness, overall just prosperity and well-being of Americans, and global citizens as well. So when we're thinking about this need to build big things, to build, and how are you thinking about that right now? Like you alluded to it. It's not just clean for you, which I am regularly welcomely surprised. I don't think welcomely is a word, but I'm welcomingly surprised that that Third Way and others are starting to talk beyond clean energy, with clean defining a very narrow set. So now we're building in more baseload solutions. But how are you thinking about building things that are sort of traditionally unpopular on the left, whether that's nuclear, whether that's transmission lines, anything with a footprint?
I mean, look, I think it goes beyond the left-right definitions as politics has really considered them over the last 30 years. Even the two parties are really divided by factions. So you have a faction on the right that says we don't want to build much and views a lot of the innovative technologies with a level of suspicion driven by ideology that isn't founded on economics, it isn't founded on the technological performance, and isn't founded in what we define broadly as the national interest. And it is mirrored on the left. Mm-hmm. And so when we get into these battles, it's no longer, well, how do you just build a coalition from the center to the left in our case, or the center to the right on the Republican side? It's really, how do you pick and choose which factions are going to support the building out of infrastructure? So that's problem one. It is much more complicated than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Problem two is we don't have a common definition of what's in the national interest. And I think one of the things that we've seen some countries do well when they do implement some sort of industrial strategy is they define what's in and for what reasons: national security, economic growth, innovation, any number of reasons, reliability, climate. And they define what's out and they say, okay, we're going to focus on these things in the energy world that are in the national interest. There's nothing close to a consensus on that. One of the frustrations, deep frustrations we had with the Biden implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act is that they got the spirit of that right. They included a lot of nuclear. They included natural gas with carbon capture, and on and on. But then, because of the way they built their factional coalition with the left, they added a lot of other non-energy requirements on how this would get implemented. And so it was a lot slower. It was a lot more expensive. It really blurred the lines of what was in the national interest or not, to a point where it became really hard to understand what should we be building and why, what makes sense. And it just sort of reinforced the paralysis that we've had, and it's really across the West, but we can just focus on the US. We've had this for a long time.
It's such a great and interesting point. And even though many of my listeners would self-characterize as centrist, right, conservatives, Republicans, I talk a lot about, and I think we all have a shared interest in having a high functioning left, right? You can't have any good parties if you don't have another good party, and you need you really do need a strong centrist coalition, like you're alluding to. So one of the, I think, obvious weaknesses of Democrats in the last year or so has been there hasn't been a compelling narrative of what the Democrats will be. And I love your idea because articulating even energy in the just straight up, if there was a clear Democratic proposition for energy in the national interest, that would be irresistible compared to what we have now. So I love where you're going with that. And can you talk a little bit about what your version of energy in the national interest would be? Would it be all of the above? Would it be zero emissions only? What would it be?
So we put out a paper at the beginning of this year that said Democrats need to re-embrace, and centrists more broadly, need to re-embrace all of the above. That the reality is natural gas is still used in our economy and in economies around the world for a wide variety of reasons, and it's going to continue to be used for the foreseeable future. Oil is the same way. And we have to not only accept, but embrace that reality as we also say, let's move a lot more quickly on clean energy technologies where we think either the US has a competitive advantage or we need to do it because it is of a national security or economic interest. I think there needs to be a conversation to define that. I think from our standpoint, it would include nuclear, it would include batteries, it would include grid enhancing technologies, in addition to the natural gas that we're already extracting, to the oil that we're extracting. So it would be all of that. The one thing I don't mention in that is coal. And it's been fascinating to see the Trump administration's attempts to keep coal online and revive a coal market. against the interest of a lot of the utilities that are operating those plants. And it's reinforcing our sense that the markets are telling us that coal in many, many cases is too expensive. The plants are unreliable and old. There isn't interest in building additional new coal plants. And the companies that are operating existing ones would like to retire them when they are scheduled to retire. Not necessarily accelerate the retirement, but it doesn't make sense to keep coal plants online to the extent that, as Grid Strategies estimated, it could cost American ratepayers $3 to $6 billion per year if the retiring coal plants that are on the fleet right now are forced by mandate from the administration to be kept online beyond when the market and the utilities that operate them want to keep them online. So it's weird to all of a sudden be a centrist that has supported a fair amount of government action in what is already a very regulated market to say, hey, we're actually the ones that are supporting market direction for what is used and not used more than government intervention.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And even going back one idea earlier that you were emphasizing, this idea of national interest, there's also an implied patriotism in there that I think is important and opportunistic right now, right? Because the energy dominance agenda, it is inspiring to a certain segment of the population, but it doesn't mean that the opposite of energy dominance is some sort of absence of U.S. centric interest. And I think that embracing innovation and an excitement and an optimism for the future, all in the national interest, is actually a really important piece of this puzzle that you're putting together for what could be a compelling Democrat-led centrist coalition around energy. Let me ask you, just to translate this into the issue of the day, which is permitting reform. Absent the pokes in the eyes with a sharp stick that's been happening around wind cancellation, let's just put that to the side for a second, because neither you nor I can do anything about that. What do you see as the makings of a centrist coalition around permitting reform? And would it include natural gas pipelines for interest, for example? I think, for example, it makes a lot of sense to do linear facilities. Similarly, transmission lines and pipelines, let's do them together. Baseload generation, those kind of things. Put them together. How are you thinking about that? What could success look like?
The good news is I think that the permitting coalition is already coalescing. And it's one of those examples of an issue where it's the factionalism within each party that is causing as many problems as the rivalry between parties. So there is, in the last Congress, there was an effort to pass permitting. It was called EPRA. Senators Hickenlooper and Bennett, and amongst others, were quite involved in that process that in many ways was sort of a pipes and wires bill. And so it was more colloquial than linear expansion, but it was this idea that the United States needs more pipelines and we need a lot more wires. Let's do both of those. I think that we could build on that. That includes both of those two ideas. It could include streamlining for approval of all sorts, both clean and conventional fuels, to build a lot more power plants and other facilities more quickly. And also, from both sides, ban the bans. If a state or a locality, maybe with some exceptions around transmission and pipelines that already exist, but transmission in addition, if they have concerns about a facility, they should be able to keep their processes to at least give local and state voice for that. But at the federal level, we shouldn't have presidents intervening and saying, I know that this pipeline or I know this wind project has already been approved, but I'm going to unilaterally stop it. We as a country, the energy sector, developers, investors need to have confidence that there's a path that works and that the government is good for its word, regardless of who's in power in the White House. And we just don't have that right now. And we didn't have that to the full extent that we should have in the last administration either.
I think that's such a great point. And it trickled, ban the bans could be relevant at every level, because
Yeah.
a ban is essentially a cop out of having a
Yeah.
process, whether at a federal level or at a local level. And nobody should get to just opt out of engaging in what's there. Like, we're all going to have to give something and give something up to build the energy system of the future. And we should be having conversations about those trade-offs, not opting out and leaving it to somebody else, whether it's a different state or a different county or a different community. So I love that idea, and I could not agree more. Let me translate this to another series that I'm working on that is focused on the problem solvers. And the problem solvers is who I'm thinking of. If you're in, for example, a blue state, and you have a net zero by 2040 goal, and yet you're now faced with this reliability crisis, a affordability mandates, and you're squeezed between essentially the kind of an old climate paradigm, although it's still alive and well in many jurisdictions, including my home state of Colorado. But this sort of old paradigm that's like, we're going to regulate our way to net zero really fast with political will. And then just the on the ground, we need to build more stuff. And so the series for the problem solvers is really focused on thinking about how do they navigate this. I think one nice thing about what Third Way does is that you're essentially trying to provide language and cover. Like, you're not alone, and a lot of other jurisdictions are doing this, and you didn't sell out. You're just facing reality. But how are you advising visible policymakers, visible electeds who are having to make this pivot to something like explicitly supporting a pipeline or a transmission line that they would have a few years ago never imagined they would have to support?
I mean, look, I think there's a couple things that are happening right now. One is that the fact that so many Americans are experiencing increases in price in the electricity side, I mean, they're looking at their bills and being shocked. My parents, who live in Montgomery County, Maryland, found that over the summer, without any warning, their electricity bill doubled in 1 month. Wow. Just rates went up, and that's what they had to deal with. And it's a political failure, as well as a regulatory failure, as well as an infrastructure failure. And so what happens in those situations is the public is looking for frank, honest explanations of why, and what do you do about it? And we all know that trade-offs are required for all of this. And there is an authenticity to saying to the public, trade-offs are required. You know, one of the things I used to work for a member of Congress in Colorado, as you know, and really appreciated about Colorado politics and the public there is that it's so much more practical overall and so much more oriented around just give me the facts and talk about what's going to be done, rather than what's often the case in places like California or frankly Texas, where they have each side of the ideological pole that requires you to start from where it's the left in California or the right in Texas and talk from there. And and this was 20 years ago now in Colorado, but at that point, you had Republicans and Democrats controlling things. There was a real give and take. People got along. I think sort of bringing that to the process and saying, as Governor Hochul has in New York, we need a gas pipeline. Or in a lot of Democratic states, we're going to need nuclear power. Let's build it. Let's get rid of the discomfort and objections of it. Or as the governors, the Republican governors of Utah and Nevada, again, the sort of sensible West, said, hey, we shouldn't be banning solar and wind in our states because those provide additional electrons that we need and help keep our bills down. And so I think there's a power in being pragmatic, in speaking just really honestly to the public because they get the trade-offs. And also to your point earlier about, I've always found energy dominance a really weird, off-putting phrase because it kind of feels like a New York thing where there's this drive to like New York loves to talk as just overall about like how big and great and brash it is. And, there's something to it. But, in most of America, there's just this quiet confidence of yeah, we're a very strong, powerful, wealthy country, and we don't need to brag about it. And I think we need to get back to a little bit more of that to understand like this country has a lot of fantastic resources, capital, know-how. Let's just get on with doing things and decide what we're going to do rather than spending a lot of time, throwing superlatives at it.
It's you make me think of something which this is the original thought that I reserve the right to withdraw if it doesn't make sense once it comes out of my mouth. But what you're making me think of is that energy dominance as a concept in some ways is a reaction to this feeling that we got paralyzed. We couldn't agree on anything. We couldn't build anything. We all had this sense that what we were doing around the energy transition was neither going to necessarily work around reducing climate emissions, nor deliver an abundant future, a prosperous future. And I kind of wonder if dominance is then this reaction to that, and what we really can offer instead, I think, is this more optimistic, future-focused, prosperous, shared, building future. And the other thing that you invoked, which I really like, and I'm going to think about in the context of talking to the problem solvers, is this idea of just being honest, right? Like, this is hard. There are trade-offs. There's no easy answer. Yes, your bills are too high. Yes, we're all worried about reliability. And you know what? That means we're going to have to get some bulldozers out here. Like, things are going to happen and not everyone's going to like it. And I wonder if like that kind of talk, it would just be a relief from this idea that it's easy, it's free, it's happening. And we all felt in our guts that this wasn't working. But now that we're faced with all these crises, maybe we can get really motivated to be both honest, but also optimistic.
I think that's absolutely right. And, we do a lot of polling and a lot of focus groups at Third Way across a number of issues. And we've been struck by the thirst that the publics that we engage want that. And also how much they're turned off by the chaos and the activity without positive impact for them that they're currently seeing. And so, one example of that we found is that we talked to the American public about how the US engages with the rest of the world right now. And we did a number of focus groups, and every single one across race, across geography, across class, all said the same thing, which is what we're doing in tariffs, in alienating our allies, it doesn't seem like it's actually helping America. It's making us weaker. And I think that also applies to a lot of the energy policy and energy conversations we've had for many years now, whether it's telling everyone that they're going to have to drive EVs or creating the impression that they're going to have to drive EVs, but not really just helping the United States scale up electric vehicle manufacturing in a way that's affordable and building out charging infrastructure or banning wind turbines. It just doesn't seem to match what the public's interest is, but we're not having that frank conversation.
Yeah, I'm struck by a contrast that on the one hand, you and I are talking about, like, let's just go back to sensible kitchen table, policy making, like, let's tell the truth, let's figure out what the trade-offs are, let's decide what we're going to build, and then let's build it. And we're in this wild, wonderful world of innovation and next generation energy, and AI is going to transform everything, which I'm, like all people, in equal parts nervous and enraptured with the possibilities. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit too, for us to weave this into the conversation, because energy and building for energy is centric to this optimistic, techno-positive future, I think, that we'd all like to have. AI, advanced manufacturing, globally competitive America. Can you talk a little bit, one, just about your vision, like what's possible? helpful. And then two, where does the oil and gas industry fit in? Because I want to make sure that our audience, our companies are good partners with their center left compatriots who they may not agree with on everything, but can at least have this shared vision of the future. So tell us about your vision and tell us where we fit in.
Yeah. So we at Third Way are really focused on four big efforts, and this is across multiple years now. One is, how do we make sure that electricity is really affordable, reliable, secure, and cleaner in the United States? We need to have that to be able to make anything, to be able to operate the rest of our economy successfully. And there's a lot of technology in that, which leads to the second question, which is, where does America need to lead on innovation? How do we unleash doing much more in terms of extracting and refining critical minerals, both domestically, but also with partners? We need to be focused on creating that whole supply chain, starting there, deploying geothermal, developing the workforce around it, and even getting to farther off technologies, advanced nuclear, which we've talked a lot about over the years, which shows a lot of promise, and technologies like fusion. We do all of those things in fits and starts. The United States government sort of starts it and then pulls away and lets the private sector do that. But we've got the capital, we've got the expertise, we've got the people, we've got the companies. We can do a lot more of that, which leads to the third big bucket for us, which is, how do you harness that and define what the national interest is? Not just Democrats, not just centrists, but in a broader conversation, including the private sector, including Republicans, so that we have this broader sense of mission, so that we can say, okay, regardless of where we are right now, we need a US auto industry, we need US batteries, we need to manufacture them. What's the strategy for that? We're really far behind right now. And I'm equally uncomfortable with the idea from some on the left that say, let's just let Chinese EVs come in and flood the market. Or people who say, you know what, we've got a lot of oil in this country, let's just keep leaning in on internal combustion engines. I don't think either is the vision of the future that this country needs, regardless of climate reasons. But we're not having as deep and broad an honest conversation about that. I think we can do it. I mean, this is a country, as we've seen over and over again, just in our lifetimes, we've seen the US is going to lose to Japan. The US is going to lose to the European competition. Now we're going to lose to China. We have this real ability to come back. And when we focus, when we've got leadership, both in the corporate sector and in the government, to focus, we're able to do pretty extraordinary things pretty quickly, but we haven't had that moment in a while. And I am hopeful that if we can get to that moment, whether it's fusion or geothermal or deploying a really big EV charging network for people who want to drive EVs, we can do any of that.
I concur, and I love the optimism, the don't count America out component of this. And also it is in our shared interest to be, to have this America agenda that we can all get excited about. One of the things you mentioned that I'll put an exclamation point on is no incumbent industry ever succeeded by protecting the technologies and interests of the past. It only works if you modernize your contribution to what's coming next. And I think that is true of the oil and gas industry as an energy industry and an energy contributor. When you think about our industry and our leaders as partners going forward, what are the qualities that you would say, wow, I never thought I would be standing on this dais with this, maybe formerly known as an oil and gas company executive, who's now an energy executive, doing these great things. What are the qualities that would make it possible for oil and gas leaders to be valued, trusted, important contributors to creating the energy system of the future with partners on the center left?
Yeah. So look, I think there's already a lot there. These are wildly successful companies that have adapted to the times economically and technologically for, in many cases, over 100 years. They've got some of the sharpest, most adaptable engineers, business leaders that companies have in the world. And so the fact is, there's a lot of the skills that we're going to need that are already there. And I think from the center and center left, rather than saying, no, you cannot enter the geothermal space, no, you cannot use any sort of hydraulic fracturing technology for advanced oil recovery with carbon capture, we need to be adapting to that and encourage the know-how and the business skills and the adaptability, as well as the market share and capitalization that they have into the broader energy conversation and technology development and deployment. So I think that that's on the center left side of saying, let's bring them in, let's have more done with that. I think on the other side, there has been a reluctance, because it is a lowercase c conservative culture in the oil and gas industry, to speak out and speak frankly. And that is particularly the case now. There's a lot of feeling that anyone who sticks their head above the parapet and says what's happening with this administration isn't working, even if it's on an economic or market issue rather than a political issue, will find their heads shot off rather than worked with. But we see it in the Dallas Fed report. There's a lot of frustration in the oil and gas industry with the chaos and uncertainty and tariffs that this administration has imposed. I think some frank talk on that would be very helpful within what makes sense for these companies to start building that comfort level with a broader set of elected officials and NGOs and others. And I think the other thing is, I've been in meetings behind closed doors where I will hear an oil executive say to us, to elected officials, but we support a price on carbon, but we support methane regulations, but we support pick your proposal. But it gets uncomfortable when someone asks, well, what have you done publicly on this? How much of your lobbying effort in the disclosures that you file do you state you are lobbying on behalf of? And whether it is a fair perception or not, it feeds this perception that there's not the same authenticity, there's not the same trust, there's not the same good faith effort being presented to try to accomplish these policies that they're claiming there's a common effort trying to advance. And so I think that's the other side of the coin. If we're going to say, great, come on into the coalition, let's help scale advanced geothermal, let's use your capital, your market share, your know-how, fantastic. I think on the other side it is, let's be really collaborative more, and here's some straightforward thinking and public risk taking to get to that next generation of policy.
Well, Josh, on behalf of the oil and gas industry, which I am not in any way authorized to speak for, I just want to thank you for your feedback and say we hear you. And navigating this time in public and in private is challenging, and it's really important that we start thinking about the stories that will be told of this time and of the industry in this time. So I think that your feedback is well received. I also just want to put a plug in that let's just do carbon tax, people. If not, let's resuscitate it from the.
That is a whole other show that we can talk about. But I hear you about needing that sort of conversation.
And then maybe if it gets revived, everyone will say it happened. It happened when Tisha and Josh talked about carbon tax. Okay, so final question for you, Josh, that I asked all my guests: what are you most optimistic about?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that particularly right now, when we're bombarded from so many different voices to be pessimistic, a little bit of optimism and sort of recentering ourselves on that is really important. Look, I think a lot of the technologies that we hoped would be transformative over a long period of time are becoming more transformative and more affordable more quickly than many of us expected. Batteries are, on the long duration storage side, they're coming down in cost at an incredibly fast rate. Electric vehicles around the world are being adopted at much faster pace than we would have expected. And we're finding that the technologies can be developed and deployed more affordably than even 5 years ago many people would have guessed. And so we can replicate that. We've got fusion that is developing at a pace that who knows if it's 10 years off or 20 or 30 years off, but we are seeing progress being made that 5 years ago would have felt like science fiction. And so I think within the innovation world, we need a lot more technologies, but we are getting those technologies coming through. So that's one. The other thing that I think is undersold is the importance of the US, particularly natural gas sector, in helping Europe stand up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That was an existential crisis for the United States, for Europe, for any sort of preservation of a global order that valued peace and valued democracies standing up to authoritarian aggression. And the US stepped in and really, in a big way, from the oil and gas sector, helped avoid an economic and energy catastrophe in Europe that otherwise could very well have happened. And it leaves me optimistic that, again, we can respond to crises, we can do these big things, but we need to apply it more broadly than we have in American politics over the last many years now.
Josh, thanks so much for the work you do. Thanks for being willing to come to the other side and have a conversation. And thanks for helping us carve out this awkward, messy, incremental place in the middle where we are going to find and build the future. So thanks for joining me on Energy Thinks. That's our episode for today. Thanks so much to Josh for joining me, and thanks to you, our listeners, for making conversations like this possible. I really love thinking about how much agency we have in creating what comes next. I love to get all patriotic, especially with a good lefty. I love that feeling. So that was really fun for me. If you like what you're hearing here on Energy Thinks, I hope you'll take a moment and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcast. I also hope you'll go and subscribe to my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true, either on our website at energythinks.com or on Substack. If you want to support my work and you're not an Adamantine client, you are welcome to have a paid subscription, but no obligation. Now, I promised you a quick personal update at the end of this podcast. So by the time you get this, I will have come back from going to Paris to make an announcement on behalf of Energy Core, one of our Adamantine clients and one of my personal passion projects. So we'll all know how that goes. For me, that's next week. So I don't know how that's going. And then I go I come home for like 12 hours, and then I go do some meetings in Houston, and then I head to Costa Rica, where those of you who have been paying attention know I will be surfing the second longest left in the world. And for those who care about my fitness journey, yes, Pilates is hard. My abs hurt in weird places I didn't know they existed. But also I have to do a lot of squats, because if you're going to hold if you're going to stay upright on your surfboard, you're going to have strong quads. So by the time you listen to this, I'll be there. So think good, long left thoughts for me. All right. I'd like to thank my colleague, Elena Heyer, for making Energy Thinks possible. Until next time, I'm Tisha Schuler, wishing you and yours happiness, prosperity, and good health.